What's going on down here?
No, nothing. A little spring cleaning.
I got a complaint. Looking around, I can tell that my complaint might be based in a little bit of truth. Hey guys, how about you all step out here a minute? I need to talk to these fellas.
Moonshiners put the secret world of illegal distilling on TV for millions to see. But what if the reality behind the cameras was completely different? Claims of staged scenes, producer manipulation, and law enforcement involvement have raised serious questions about what the audience was actually watching. Then, one of the show's most recognizable figures, Digger Maines, reportedly broke his silence.
Making liquor goes right now, there will be no liquor made inside the corporate city limits of Newport. Now, are we going to stop altogether? Quitters, they have to go to meetings. We ain't quitters.
Revealing details that could change everything fans thought they knew about the series. Join us as we uncover the shocking discovery that nearly brought the entire operation crashing down. The shutdown nobody saw coming. For more than a decade, Moonshiners built its reputation on an intriguing idea. Cameras had somehow gained access to people engaged in one of America's oldest illegal traditions. Viewers watched men disappear into the Appalachian woods, build hidden stills, move their liquor, and constantly worry about getting caught. The danger was supposed to be real, and that uncertainty was a major part of the show's appeal. But almost from the beginning, there was a problem that refused to disappear. If these people were openly manufacturing illegal alcohol while being filmed for television, why weren't they being arrested? And if the authorities knew cameras were following them, how could the production continue season after season? Those questions became especially difficult to ignore after the show's first season. Virginia authorities publicly pushed back against the impression that the program was documenting active illegal distilling. The Virginia Department of Alcoholic Beverage Control said its investigators had not found evidence that the people portrayed were actually producing illegal liquor during filming. The agency also said it had been led to believe the program was more of a historical documentary about moonshine. That revelation completely changed the conversation around Moonshiners. Suddenly, viewers weren't just wondering whether the cast would get caught. They were wondering what exactly they had been watching in the first place. The show, which premiered on Discovery in 2011, was officially presented as a docudrama rather than a straightforward documentary. Its cast members also insisted that their backgrounds in moonshining were genuine. In a 2017 interview, Mark Ramsey and Digger Maines maintained that their work was authentic and explained that filming was carefully timed because they believed authorities might use the evidence if they encountered illegal activity in progress. That distinction is important because the story is more complicated than simply saying Moonshiners was fake. Some people featured on the program had genuine connections to distilling, and Digger himself has continued to defend the authenticity of what he and Mark do. More recently, he told TV Insider that what viewers see is, in his words, factual, while emphasizing that the show is about more than simply producing illegal liquor. Still, the questions never went away. If the show wasn't literally documenting illegal moonshining as viewers initially assumed, how much of the drama was constructed for television? And that question became even more important as Moonshiners grew. There were more arrests, with more dramatic escapes, and the confrontations were more intense. Meanwhile, the cameras kept rolling. Then came the part of the story that would make viewers look at the entire series differently, raising questions about what was really happening behind those cameras. The man who almost lost everything. Before Moonshiners became one of Discovery's most recognizable reality shows, the people at its center already had lives deeply connected to the Appalachian distilling tradition. Eric Digger Maines and Mark Ramsey were not created by television. They had spent years learning the craft, developing recipes, and building a friendship around their shared knowledge of making spirits. That history became part of what made Moonshiners different from a conventional reality series. Viewers weren't introduced to actors playing fictional moonshiners. They were introduced to people who already knew the culture, the equipment, and the traditions surrounding Appalachian distilling. Their personalities simply became more recognizable once cameras entered the picture. For Digger, however, life away from the cameras had already delivered a serious warning about how quickly everything could change. In 2013, he was diagnosed with cancer. The illness forced him to step away from the work he loved while undergoing treatment, and for a man whose identity had become closely connected to distilling, the experience was a major interruption to his life. Digger eventually recovered, and his return to the show became another chapter in Moonshiners' history. His partnership with Mark also became increasingly central to the series. Together, they weren't simply producing traditional moonshine for the cameras. They were experimenting with different recipes, exploring old Appalachian techniques, and developing their knowledge of spirits into something that could exist beyond the show's original premise. What began as a series built around the mystery of hidden stills gradually expanded into a much larger television franchise. The cast became recognizable personalities. Distilling competitions became part of the story. And Moonshiners, Master Distiller gave experienced distillers an entirely different platform to demonstrate their skills. Suddenly, the people viewers had originally watched trying to stay hidden were becoming celebrities within the spirits world. Digger and Mark were at the center of that transformation. Their friendship became one of the show's most recognizable relationships, while their knowledge gave the series something that couldn't easily be manufactured: years of experience with the traditions it claimed to document. But success brought another problem. The more popular Moonshiners became, the more difficult it was to separate the real people from the television characters audiences had grown attached to. Viewers weren't simply watching someone make liquor anymore. They were following personalities, rivalries, businesses, experiments, setbacks, and increasingly elaborate storylines. And that raised the stakes whenever something went wrong. If it still failed, it became television. If a business struggled, it became television. If someone had a confrontation, it became television. Even major personal events could eventually become part of the world audiences associated with Moonshiners. The show had grown far beyond its original premise. And just as that expansion was changing what Moonshiners meant to its audience, something much bigger was beginning to challenge the world surrounding the series. So, when the show had already become a major television franchise, what happened that forced the Moonshiners to confront a threat far greater than anything they had faced on camera? When Moonshiners became bigger than the still. As Moonshiners continued, the show became more ambitious, and so did the lives of the people appearing on it. What had started with hidden stills and backwoods liquor gradually expanded into businesses, competitions, new distilling techniques, and increasingly complicated battles with rivals and law enforcement. Digger and Mark were at the center of that evolution. Their work moved beyond simply making traditional spirits in the woods. They began experimenting with unusual recipes, recreating historic drinks, and using their knowledge in Moonshiners, Master Distiller, where they joined Tim Smith and other experts as judges. Discovery was no longer telling just one story about illegal distilling. It had built an entire franchise around the culture. But the bigger Moonshiners became, the more complicated its stories became too. One example came in season 14, when Mark and Digger discovered that someone had allegedly been siphoning liquor from their barrel operation. Instead of simply losing some whiskey, they immediately started trying to identify whoever had been taking it. Later episodes escalated the storyline, with the pair attempting to determine who was watching their operation and eventually setting a trap for the person they believed was responsible. The law also remained a constant threat within the show's world. In another season 14 storyline, Mark and Digger became concerned about an unmarked vehicle near their barrel house and had to rethink how they would move their bourbon. Later, they prepared their teams after believing they were under police surveillance. Those storylines helped preserve the tension that had made Moonshiners successful from the beginning. But they also demonstrated just how far the series had moved from its original premise. There were now multiple operations, competing distillers, commercial ambitions, elaborate equipment, and increasingly complex storylines unfolding across different locations. And as the show grew, the real world around its cast was changing too. The Appalachian communities where many of these stories were rooted were facing economic pressures, changing laws, natural disasters, and the complex relationship between traditional moonshining and the modern legal spirits industry. Some cast members began exploring legitimate distilling, while others continued presenting themselves as outlaws working outside the system. That tension became part of what kept the series alive. The Moonshiners weren't simply trying to avoid the law anymore. They were trying to preserve a tradition while figuring out whether it could survive in a world changing around them. Then came an episode that brought the show's most familiar threat back into focus. The law was getting closer. By the end of season 14, Mark and Digger were dealing with surveillance concerns, attempts to clear evidence, and the possibility that authorities were already one step ahead of them. Apart from that, there was another development that had already changed the way many viewers looked at Moonshiners. The deeper people looked into the show, the harder it became to separate what was genuinely happening from what had been shaped for television. And that distinction would become central to the controversy surrounding the series. The discovery that changed how fans saw Moonshiners. Throughout the series, viewers weren't simply watching people make whiskey. They were being invited into a world that was supposed to exist beyond the reach of ordinary television. But eventually, one question became impossible to ignore. How much of what viewers were seeing was actually happening the way the show presented it? That question wasn't entirely new. Moonshiners had faced skepticism about its authenticity almost from the beginning, as critics questioned whether some of the cast members were genuinely producing illegal liquor and whether authorities would really allow cameras to document criminal activity so openly. The controversy became particularly interesting because the show's stars didn't all approach the question in exactly the same way. Digger Maines, for example, has repeatedly pushed back against the idea that Moonshiners is simply scripted fiction. In interviews, he has described the events involving himself and Mark Ramsey as factual, while acknowledging that television naturally selects and shapes what audiences eventually see. But then came the claims that pushed the controversy much further. Online accounts began circulating stories alleging that Digger had exposed secret arrangements involving Discovery, law enforcement, scripted scenes, and federal agents. Some versions went even further, claiming that the entire premise of Moonshiners was essentially a government operation disguised as reality television. It was an explosive allegation. If it were true, it would completely change how audiences understood the series. The Moonshiners wouldn't simply be people being followed by cameras. They would have been participants in a carefully managed production involving people outside the show itself. But there was just one problem. The evidence did not support the most extreme version of that story. No reliable public record establishes that Discovery Channel secretly operated Moonshiners as a joint production with the U.S. government. Likewise, there is no verified evidence that Digger publicly exposed a massive federal operation that forced Discovery to shut down the series. And once viewers began examining that distinction, the biggest revelation was no longer that Moonshiners had been exposed as fake, but that the reality behind reality television was considerably more complicated than the finished episodes made it appear. Then, in September 2024, the people and communities connected to the series faced a very different kind of disruption, one that had nothing to do with television production or questions about what was real. A powerful hurricane tore through Appalachia, leaving destruction in its wake and forcing several cast members to deal with the aftermath firsthand. What happened when Hurricane Helen tore through the very Appalachian communities that had become the heart of Moonshiners? The disaster that nearly stopped everything. Just as Moonshiners was dealing with questions about the show itself, the people behind it were hit by something no producer could control. In September 2024, Hurricane Helen tore through the southeastern United States, causing catastrophic flooding across parts of Appalachia. Communities in western North Carolina and eastern Tennessee were among the hardest hit, and several people connected to Moonshiners were suddenly dealing with the destruction firsthand. The storm was especially significant because Appalachia wasn't simply the backdrop for the series. It was where many of the cast members lived, worked, and maintained the traditions that had made Moonshiners successful in the first place. For some of the cast, the damage was enormous. The destruction affected roads, homes, businesses, vehicles, and equipment across the region. In the world of Moonshiners, where characters regularly disappear into remote mountain locations to build stills and move liquor, the landscape itself is part of the story. Helen changed that landscape dramatically. The aftermath eventually became part of the series. In Season 14, one storyline followed Mike and Jerry after a flood destroyed their new submarine. The equipment they had built was washed away, forcing them to rebuild rather than simply continue with their planned operation. Discovery's own episode description specifically identifies the flooding as occurring after Hurricane Helen. But the cast wasn't only dealing with problems that could become television storylines. After the hurricane, members of the Moonshiners community also became involved in relief efforts. In December 2024, Moonshiners personalities partnered with the Petty Family Foundation through Operation Appalachian Christmas, helping to deliver supplies to areas of western North Carolina and Tennessee affected by the disaster. The effort included getting pilots into the air and supplies onto the ground for families affected by the storm. That was a very different side of Moonshiners from what audiences normally saw. Instead of watching cast members worry about hiding a still or getting one step ahead of the authorities, viewers were seeing people connected to the show respond to a genuine emergency affecting their own communities. And the timing was striking. The series had spent years presenting Appalachia as a mysterious place filled with hidden operations, dangerous roads, and people determined to protect an old tradition. Hurricane Helen exposed another reality of the region. Communities where neighbors depended on one another when roads disappeared, homes flooded, and ordinary life was suddenly interrupted. For Moonshiners, however, the production itself did not end. Season 14 continued, and the show eventually returned for another season. Discovery premiered Season 15 on January 6, 2026, with Mark Ramsey, Digger Maines, Tim Smith, Josh Owens, Steve Tickle, and other familiar cast members still appearing. That fact is important because it separates the dramatic headline from what actually happened. Moonshiners wasn't permanently shut down by Hurricane Helen. The disaster disrupted the lives and operations of people connected to the series, but the television franchise survived. And if a devastating hurricane couldn't bring the show to an end, there was still one thing capable of creating a much bigger problem: the growing suspicion that viewers didn't know the full story behind what they were watching. So, after years of questions about authenticity, production, and the line between reality and television, What does the evidence actually tell us about the shocking discovery that supposedly shut Moonshiners down? What really happened to Moonshiners? After all the headlines, one fact needs to be separated from the speculation. Moonshiners was not shut down, allegedly. Discovery continues to list the series, and Season 15 premiered in January 2026, with a familiar cast including Mark Ramsey, Digger Maines, Tim Smith, Josh Owens, and Steve Tickle. What did happen was considerably more complicated. During Season 14, Mark and Digger faced a serious encounter with law enforcement after they were found with a functioning still. According to Digger and Mark in a 2026 interview, they were detained and released after authorities drilled a hole in the still, making it non-functional. They said no charges were filed, but the experience shook them enough that they shut down their operation for roughly 6 months. That incident became part of the storyline leading into Season 15. Rather than disappearing from television, Digger and Mark returned with a much more cautious approach, saying they wanted to keep a lower profile and limit the involvement of others in their operation. Their return is documented by the show's own current episode listings, which continue to feature the pair. The same distinction matters when considering the long-running claims that Moonshiners is completely scripted or secretly controlled by federal authorities. Those claims have circulated for years, but they should not be presented as established fact without evidence. In a 2026 interview, Digger directly rejected the idea that what viewers see is fabricated, stating that the events are factual and explaining that the show is not primarily intended to depict the illegal aspects of moonshining. There is also no reliable evidence that Discovery was secretly operating Moonshiners as a joint production with federal law enforcement, as some viral accounts have claimed. Even Digger's comments about the show being a possible ATF setup were presented in the context of contestants' early suspicions about Master Distiller, not as proof that federal agents controlled the series. And Hurricane Helen didn't shut the show down either. The September 2024 disaster genuinely affected Appalachia and even destroyed Mike and Jerry's submarine Still, a loss later incorporated into Season 14. But the series continued airing, and Discovery subsequently moved into Season 15. And as long as Discovery continues putting new episodes on the schedule, the show's biggest mystery may not be why it was shut down, but why so many people became convinced that it already was. Was Moonshiners really shut down after a shocking discovery? Or did the viral story blur together several very different events? And after everything the cast and production have faced, do you think the show can still survive the questions surrounding its authenticity? Share your thoughts in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.